So I'm driving in the car here, and I had a thought. So sorry for the in-car video thing. So the other day, I had this guy who hate watched a bunch of my videos. It was super interesting, and left comments in like a half dozen videos. All of them pretty negative, which is fine. You know, you're entitled to your opinion, whatever. Basically it was just like trashing me on a couple of my approaches, whatever. It was like, well, what military unit have you served in? And this kind of thing. You don't know what you're talking about, and this will get you killed, and etc., right? And I was thinking about that, and I read through the comments. I didn't reply because I thought it was fairly self-evident what I'm about to explain now. But I thought it was interesting because I think that the primary philosophical understanding I have is that experience doesn't necessarily make someone wise. Well evaluated experience does. That's what makes someone wise or gives them wisdom or understanding. And that's true about any topic in life. Guns, carpentry, marriage, parenting, friendship, whatever, farming, okay? It doesn't matter what it is. Just because you've been doing something a long time, or did something, like went and fought in GWOT, for example, right, doesn't necessarily mean you know what you're talking about. It might just mean that you learned to do it a certain way, and then in your mind, that was always the way, and any other way is wrong, and you've never considered or evaluated that experience or that methodology ever, and then that's it, right? So your whole life you're saying, well, you're doing it wrong because you didn't do it the way, this way, meaning the way I learned it, which is the correct way, right? And I think there are, again, true in any industry, anywhere at all, be it carpentry or veterans or whatever. Like it doesn't matter, right? Like I've never been in the military, never done any of that. I'm very upfront about that. Oh no, am I about to miss my turn? Nope, not missing my turn. Gotta pay attention while you're driving. So like I said, I mean, I've never been in any military unit, never done any of that. And I was thinking about it, I'm like, well, okay, I design gear, right? I get out and I use it. And I teach some classes on shooting every year. And so what makes me qualified to do that? Like why should I be allowed to design gear, right? And I thought about that, and I thought, well, the reason I design gear, and the reason I find this whole thing interesting and enjoyable is because I have spent a significant amount of time reading, number one, and trying to evaluate other people's experience because I necessarily have that. Two, I've gotten all the experience that I personally can, meaning I go out and I use my gear and I do the training and I go to classes and I do my own personal drive practice and, et cetera, right? To see what works and what doesn't. And maybe we should move this pouch here or whatever, right? And I've tried to very thoroughly evaluate the experience, both my own and other people's, and say what would or wouldn't work. Now, you can say, well, Dylan, you still don't know what you're talking about, you're an idiot, and that's fine, again, entitled to your opinion. But I think what's interesting to me is that there are people who don't have that category at all. They don't think about well-evaluated experience. They don't think about evaluating their experience. They think, I had an experience or someone else had an experience, right? And so therefore, their opinion qualifies them, or their experience qualifies them to have an opinion about this matter, right? So, tangential example, right? If you're into shooting or whatever, you talk about that occasionally. Someone will always say, oh, well, my cousin is a police officer, or, I know this person, they're a sheriff's deputy or whatever, you know, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to relate to you to say this person's really good at shooting and I know them, you know, which is nice. They're trying to be polite, right? But then they'll start telling you, you know, how great of a shooter they are because obviously they're a police officer, right? So their shooting is really good. But if you've been around and you're a competent to good shooter yourself, you understand that most police officers can't shoot at all. A lot of police officers aren't really interested in shooting, right? It's just a job for them. And on average, the American police officer gets 16 hours of firearms training a year, right? 2-day class. 2-day class a year is what they get, typically. Now, are there exceptions to the rule? Yeah, of course, obviously, right? There are some police officers who are very good shooters. But that is the rule, right? And does that, just because they're a police officer, just because they had this experience, or they've been a police officer for 15 years, does this automatically qualify them to be better at shooting or teaching how to shoot or anything like that? Well, I would argue no. No, it doesn't. Why? Because the experience isn't necessarily well evaluated, although again, it could be. And you know, if it's like teaching, that's a whole different skill set. Teaching is its own skill set, separate from shooting. You can be a very good shooter. There are top level IDPA grandmaster shooters that will shoot better than I ever can, who are not qualified to teach anything, right? Why? Because teaching is its own skill. And if just because I know something doesn't mean I can communicate to you how to know it, right? So again, it's that well evaluated, well thought through experience that's what makes people wise or lets their opinions on, you know, whatever topic carry more weight. Not necessarily because they had that experience, but don't get me wrong, experience helps, right? Experience is good. You know, but just because someone's been doing the same job, you know, just because they've been a software engineer for 25 years, does that mean they're a great software engineer? Well, maybe not, right? Maybe they've just been doing it poorly for 25 years. That could happen. So, I just think it's interesting that I don't. Whenever someone wants to leave long hate comments on my video or someone else's video or whatever, the more they talk, the more they betray themselves when they're a person who's just like, well, look, I had this experience. I know what I'm talking about. You're an idiot. You haven't had this experience, and that's what makes you an idiot. And I don't know. I just think that's a I'm not even offended, honestly. I think I just feel bad for the person. Because I'm like, well, you're not really living a well thought through life, you know. Socrates, I think, said that the unevaluated life is not worth living, you know. And I guess that's kind of how I think about it. I'm like, well, that sounds like a really sad way to live because you're like locked into this thing that you were told when you were like 18 or 19 years old and you were in the military. And this was the right way to do it, and that was beat into your brain because you were 18 or 19, and you know you can't have someone screwing around when they're 19 years old running, you know, an M240 Bravo machine gun or something, right? Like you can't have that. So I get why the military does what it does, and I'm not even necessarily saying it's wrong, but I think that when people don't grow through that or from that or understand the why behind it, then they leave long comments on the internet in public exposing that they're not that intelligent and haven't really thought about it, you know. And again, free country, say what you want, whatever. I just think that that's intriguing, interesting, something, right? So if you're watching this, what I would tell you is evaluate your experience, right? Like, evaluate your own, evaluate other people's. Like Napoleon, before he became, in his rise, his great ascension to power, right, spent untold number of hours reading books, right, and researching the great generals who came before him, you know, like Alexander and Caesar and, you know, on and on. Caesar, before he rose to power, older than I am now, read the great exploits of Alexander, right? Like, I just think we have a wealth of military history and knowledge and other people's experiences that you can learn from. And is that as valuable as your own experience? Not always, usually not, okay? But it doesn't mean it's not valuable, right? There's a gazillion good war memoirs out there. I'm halfway through, a little less than halfway through, David Hackworth's About Face, which is just his memoirs right now. It's interesting. Some things I'm learning, some things I disagree with, some things I like, I don't like, right? But that's just it. I get to, because he took the time to write all that down, I get to learn from his experience, right? I get to evaluate his experience and learn from it. And this is why I'm such a big fan of reading, because other people's experience is free. Free. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you have to buy the book, but you don't have to pay the experience price, right? Like, in order for David Hackworth, for example, to earn his experience, he had to go to combat in Korea and get wounded a couple times, right? But I can learn from his experience without having to get wounded, which helps me, right? So, evaluate your experience. This is why I'm such a nerd about reading the books, because I think it's other people's experience I get to evaluate for free. And think through it. I think if you're a thinking person who's saying, well, why do we do that? Why does that work? I mean, should that work? Could we do it better? Could we do it different? Like, that will help you continue to grow and understand things, right? I remember back when I watched the Magpul videos for the very first time, right, with Travis Haley and Chris Costa. Remember how cool that was? It's still cool, by the way. And I remember one of the lines they said was like, hey, next year we might do it different. Like, we're trying to grow and learn to do this, right? So I watched those videos a ton. And then the very first class I ever took, I was fortunate enough to take a class with Travis Haley, right? And it was cool. I was still a little starstruck, right? And so I'm in this class, and Travis Haley asked this question. He said, when do you do a tactical reload? And I thought, oh, I know this answer, right? Because I've watched the Magpul videos. And I quoted Travis Haley to Travis Haley, word for word, right? I said, when you have time and opportunity, word for word, quoted him. And he looked at me and he said, when do you have time and opportunity in a gunfight? And I just gave him this dumbstruck look. Like, I'm sure I looked like an idiot, right? Like, I just looked at him like, what are you talking about? And then he's, this is in front of the whole class, right? And then he announces to the whole class, he's like, you do not have time and opportunity in a gunfight, and goes on to make his teaching point, right? And I remember just sitting there being like, I felt so betrayed, right? And like, wait a second, I gave the right answer. But what happened there? What happened there is he had continued to evaluate his experience, and he made some changes, right? And I think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about growing and evaluating and making changes. Now, at some point, you have to arrive at some decision, right? You can't just continue to grow forever. That's not necessarily growth. That's just wandering. But to have that well-evaluated, well-thought-out experience, your own, other person's, whatever, and to think through the problem is what's going to make you a more effective Minuteman, right? Or a more effective weightlifter, or carpenter, or software engineer, or plumber, or whatever. That doesn't really matter. We're just talking about Minuteman in this specific context, right? So, for all my military vet bros who watch this, we love you guys. Thank you for all of your experience. Continue to evaluate that to help the rest of us out. For all of my non-military vet bros, right? We love you guys. You everyday guys like me, right? Evaluate the experience that you do have and learn from other people's experience through a well-evaluated lens. And don't just take it of, oh, they did X, Y, and Z, therefore, I should just take everything they say. Well, no. Evaluate it in your context with your needs and your specific mission set, for lack of a better word, right? So I hope that's helpful. Hope that gives you something to think about. Do brave deeds and to do it.